If you're using egg or sperm donation to have a child, you'll be really interested in this episode. Most people look at things like hair color and eye color and athleticism and height as ways to choose a donor. And if you've been following me for a while, you know that although those things are nice, it's really not a way to choose a donor who's going to give you the best chances of having a healthy child. We really need to think about genetics. So today, I've invited someone who's going to talk to us about all the things that you need to know when you're choosing a donor, but also the tests that you can have. If you watched our last episode, which you should really watch, it will tell you all of the basics about PGTA, PGTM, and this new technology, PGTP. In this episode, we're going to dive in a little bit further and talk about the ways that PGTP help us understand how to choose a donor. So tune in. I think it's going to be really helpful for you. From our Building Your Family community, this is the Building Your Family podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Schumann, author, researcher, and reproductive medicine therapist. Welcome back to part 2 of this very special episode on genetics and genetic screening with Dr. Anomaly. He's going to share with us some of the things that you really need to know when you're choosing a donor. As you know, it is so important to make sure that you think about this wisely. This is not a decision that we can take lightly. And very often people think about things that make them feel comfortable, which is absolutely natural, but they think about those things before thinking about the things that will really move the needle in their health and well-being. So we need to talk about that, as I do in my book and my masterclass. And I'm going to talk now to Dr. Anomaly about what that will mean for you. Thanks so much for coming back.
Great to be here. Thank you.
As you may know or may not know, in my book, I talk a lot about genetic screening and donors because people very often think about, I really want somebody who looks like Christy Brinkley. Well, Christy Brinkley's daughter looks like Billy Joel, right? So we really need to think about that.
Yeah.
And people don't think about it. And as a result, people look at these Match.com sort of websites and they think, oh, well, I would love for my donor to be musical or athletic or look like my mother or look like Christy Brinkley. Now, because of that, the hot donors, the donors who are in great demand, are primarily blonde hair and blue eyes. That's number one. And then people who go to Ivy League schools, which, as you know, people who have high IQs sometimes are not the kids in Ivy League schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, work ethic, and there's so many other contributing factors. We see lots and lots of people who have amazing talents at a young age, and then it seems to even out as they get older. Some of these child prodigies don't end up being the Nobel Peace Prize winners. And some people who go to schools that are not Ivy League schools end up accomplishing amazing things. So there's so many variables to think about, and yet people are not really thinking about that. They're anxious about choosing a donor. They want to have somebody who's just going to make them feel good. They're feeling a little dysregulated emotionally because they have to choose the genetics of somebody they don't know to build this intimate relationship. And it makes them feel nervous. And almost reflexively, they tend to choose somebody who's going to make them feel better. And so because of that, I wonder if people have access to PGTP, will they then choose things that will make them feel comfortable over things that are really important for them? And if that's the case, are we going to be stuck in this kind of hamster wheel of just continuing to look for the next best, prettiest, smartest, tallest person?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of dimensions to that. One, on the side of egg and sperm donors, what should you be asking if you're looking for one of these? And that's not something my company does, but we have tons of customers and especially gay couples infertile couples, all kinds of people who are looking for donors. And so I get wrapped up in these discussions all the time. I have a friend who's a professor at UT Austin trying to get an egg donor right now. And I've been asking some of my friends, hey, you look like you'd want to be this, so it's a confusing thing. And I think you're exactly right that on the one hand, yeah, people want someone who's bright and attractive, but you should really also look at things like personality, right? I mean, I don't want to judge for other people what they should want, but generally we all want kids who are friendly and good people, and they're going to have friends and maybe kind of get on in society and be responsible people. You wouldn't want just like a high IQ psychopath donor or something like that. You would want someone who probably has been tested in the world and who has a good personality. So I've always thought, these agencies that are going to Ivy Leagues, they should especially target, I don't know, medical students or something, or people who are going into fields that are like more caring professions. I don't know, but
But you see that in kids too, right? There could be 3 kids in a
mhm.
family, and one kid is the kid who turns out to be the bully in school, and one kid turns out to be the one who works for the homeless. So we don't know that either, but we do know genetics, right? And we do know that very often people don't look at this. If I need a sperm donor
Mhm.
and people in my family die of heart disease, and people in the donor's family die of heart disease, maybe that's not a good match. Or I have colon cancer and they have colon cancer. And that donor wouldn't be prevented from donating because they have cancer in their family if they die at an older age, because there's nothing wrong with that. People die of things, as you said earlier. And so if we instead, I think, look at our genetics and kind of match them up with the donor's genetics, and there's that information is there, people can look at what their grandparents are dying from, then at least we have that. And even, smaller issues like being nearsighted or having, as you said, dyslexia, things like that can be replicated into families as well. But people are very concerned about things that they see on the surface.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And yeah, there's a couple of solutions to that. One is to ask about family history, like you said, just to load the dice against some disease that maybe already runs in your family, and you don't want to double load them in favor of that
Hmm.
disease by selecting a donor where it runs in their family. Same thing could go for personality, which is a little more intangible, but it's real. I mean, these are heritable things. But I would say one of the interesting things that, for example, that I would like to get into, Harrisite in particular will probably do in the future, is be able to do polygenic scores for donors. So it's already common, to ask donors, do you have this monogenic disease, like let's say Tay-Sachs or something serious like that? But it may be that in the future we're polygenically testing donors so that you could then, this may sound either utopian and cool or dystopian depending on your perspective, but you could potentially match your DNA with theirs and see, like, is this going to likely combine in a way that elevates or lowers various risks? I don't see this as especially controversial or dystopian or anything like that. I actually think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And it's what you're doing anyway when you just ask questions and you're like, hey, do you have a family history of this? So at the very least, if you're already going through IVF or you're getting a donor, selecting a donor, it's probably a good idea. Try to get a family history by asking the right questions. And yeah, maybe in the coming years, maybe we'll get into this, actually do polygenic scores for donors. I mean, we already have a plan with a European sperm bank to try this out next year.
Wow.
It's not very well developed yet, but we think probably in the next year or two we'll be doing this. So.
Well, I think that would be fabulous if you could say to your sperm or egg bank, who is my best health match? But I do think, unfortunately, because people are so anxious, their inclination, and you can look at these sperm banks or egg banks, people will say, I'm going to choose the Tom Cruise lookalike. I'm going to choose this one. And they will, all the sperm and egg banks will put this information on their profiles because that's what people are looking for. And so my fear is that
Mm.
once this starts happening, there's going to be a greater demand for all of those things. Constantly, people are looking for blonde hair, blue eyed egg donors, and it's very hard to get one because they're in such high demand. So I think that this sort of thing can kind of go downhill, and that's my concern.
I will say you're right. One of the things when I was writing my little book on the future of genetic selection and this sort of thing, I had a chapter on aesthetic traits in addition to immunity and health traits and mental traits. And so I did a little digging on people's preferences for aesthetic traits, and the obvious ones are things like male height, depth of voice, these kinds of things that we consider sexy or whatever, and female traits similarly. And I think what's interesting is you're right, there is a prejudice in favor of the beautiful, let's say. And there's a reason that when you look on television or you listen to the radio or a podcast, it tends to be populated by people who are better looking than average or have really nice, soothing voices. Does that mean that they're going to live the best life or they're the healthiest or they're the most interesting people? Well,
Right.
no. I mean, was Albert Einstein Tom Cruise? Like, no, I'd rather
Right.
have Albert Einstein as a son, not even because
Yes.
of his intelligence. Yeah, that's cool too, but he's just a creative, interesting person. And I'd
Yes.
choose Einstein over Cruise any day. No, that's not to say, however, that good-looking people can't be smart and interesting and creative. They can be, but yeah, I think you're right that there's probably a tendency, especially in the modern world. What do? We look online for a donor or for a date, and you're looking at pictures, and that's going to bias it in favor of aesthetics against some of the traits that really do explain a long, good, productive life. Like what do
Mm-hmm.
you want in a friend? You don't just look for the most attractive friend. You look for the one
Right.
who's interesting and gets you and whatever. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I tend to agree with you, and I think as this matures, people will realize that more and more. I hope they do.
Well, I suspect you have faith in that because this is something that you feel is really important for our society.
I do, and I also have some evidence. So, when I was writing that chapter, back to the kind of aesthetics and how would people choose, I
Mm-hmm.
also, I did look at two different surveys, and these were, they might be biased a little bit because it was lesbian couples in the Bay Area looking for sperm donors, right? And I was using that as a proxy for how people will select embryos. Like what will people do when they're in the fertility clinic rather than in the dating market, right? And in the dating market, there are all kinds of pathologies, and evolutionary psychology is full of explanations for this, but women will kind of overvalue, let's say, height, and men will overvalue whatever it is, I don't know, clear skin or youthful appearance or something, relative to like long term, like is this really what makes someone a good partner or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true in the dating market, but actually in the fertility clinic, you're probably right that they overvalue it a bit, but my impression from what I saw, the evidence on surveys of what women want in sperm donors, was that they did value health, and especially mental health, and even things like kindness in their donor. And this is not the kind of thing that comes up that much. I mean, it does come up in the dating market, of course, because like you're trying people out and you're introducing them to your friends and family, and that's a way of gauging like are they pro-social, are they good people, will they treat me well? But my view is actually maybe even the reverse of what you just said in a sense, which is that when we're making really careful decisions like who's our sperm donor, egg donor, which embryo to implant, I think most people are not thinking like which is going to look like a supermodel. Some probably will. I think that's unfortunate, but I think the evidence is most people are going to think like who's going to live or what potential person might live a really good, healthy, productive life or something. And
Mm.
so my sense is that I'm not as worried maybe as I would have been before seeing that data, that people are going to make pretty good choices actually when it comes to, but that's caveat, right? The caveat is they need the data. If all you have is a picture, well, of course, like other things equal, you choose the more attractive person or whatever with like facial symmetry. But if you have information either about the family history or you have actual genetic information, like this person's really prone to X, Y, and Z, well, I think most people will take that into account.
Yes. And I think that's why it's so important for donors to have psychological screening. For some time, there were
Definitely.
very few sperm banks that did psychological screening. And as a result, there were a lot of lawsuits because there were cases, as you probably know, of people being schizophrenic and inheriting all sorts of difficulties, right? We have a case now of someone inheriting cancer genes. So it's important to have the psychological screening. But I think in the same way, It sounds like what you offer could give something like that to people, that beyond the genetic screening that they have and beyond their psychological screening, you could have this additional screening that could give you some sense of, well, is this particular person prone to whatever there might be? Because, people in a family are very different, right? We think about like the two princes of England, they have different personalities. They don't look alike, right? And so if somebody said, I want their genetics, you could get either one of them. And there are lots of people who are different than their siblings. So when people say, oh, I like that donor because he's really nice, doesn't mean your child will be nice. Maybe they'll
Yeah,
have
yeah,
a
it's not
very
guaranteeing it.
irritable personality, right?
That's
We
right.
don't know. I mean, I have 3 children. They all have different personalities. So we can't know that, but we can know what the genetics tells us. And that sounds like a very promising possibility.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked for a year at the University of San Diego building an academic program. And one of my colleagues there in law school, Dov Fox, wrote a book called Birthrights and Wrongs. And in that book, he was cataloging how there were clinics in California. I don't think they do this anymore, but where it was like self-reported traits. So you'd go into a sperm clinic and they would just ask you, like, I don't know, how high is your IQ? Do you have schizophrenia? And they'd just be like,
Oh my
no.
gosh.
And so there were these donors who just lied. And
Yes.
I don't think I don't know. I'm not an expert. I don't think they're doing that as much. There's more verification at least now,
No.
but I mean, you could double verify, by having a genetic profile. I mean, so that's maybe it's none of those will be perfect because again, nothing's 100% heritable. Well, most things are not 100%. They're
Yes.
partly heritable. And so it would be useful to have some checks on what people self-report and then the ultimate check in a way is a genetic profile of them. And maybe you'd have to pay a little more for that, but it shouldn't be that much more, maybe a couple $1,000s more or something. And I do think that's the future. That's where we're heading. And I'll contrast that. If anyone thinks, well, that's too much information or you're, dehumanizing donors or something, I don't know. I mean, imagine the opposite, which is not only you have someone who's, got high rates of schizophrenia in their family and they're donating, like they're really passing that risk to you. I've been told in places like Spain and other European countries, they're so against genetic testing, they won't even let you see a picture of your donor. They won't even let you know anything about the donor. And they're doing that, I don't know, in service of some kind of egalitarian ideal, like we all
Yeah.
just get a lottery. But guys, I mean, come on, that is really not something that you wouldn't do that in the
No.
dating market. Like, hey, government, just match me up with a random person. And I
Yes.
don't see why you should have to do that in the fertility clinic either. So
Yes. 100%. I mean, even these situations where there's no regulation, we see that, the man with 1,000 kids, people want very often to know their donor, but then they'll just meet somebody in a gas station and get a vial of sperm and they don't know what sorts of difficulties
does
that
that
person
happen?
has. They
That's
have no.
that's pretty crazy.
Yes. Yes.
I saw a case of that, like some woman advertising on Facebook or something, like, "Hey
Yes.
guys, I'm
Yes.
at this address." It's like, what?
Yes. It's
Yeah,
happening all over the place, and it's really I mean, not to mention that there's all sorts of diseases you can get and things,
exactly.
but
Yeah.
also you have the potential for all of these issues. Imagine your beautiful future. You're snuggling with your child, you feel so connected to them, your friends and family are so happy, and you have everything that you've ever wanted. I want this for you too, but I want more than that. I want you to feel secure knowing that you've made the best decisions, not just short term, but long term for your future family. Wherever you are on your journey, whether you're choosing a donor, choosing a clinic, learning how to talk to your donor conceived child about their origins, all of these decisions will have wider implications for your future. And I want you to have the right resources so you can feel empowered and confident at this very important time in your life. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Building Your Family. It's the only expert-guided platform designed for parents and parents-to-be using reproductive medicine. We provide unique strategies that you won't find anywhere else to make your path to parenthood smoother and more informed. And that's why our approach is about offering practical and actionable steps that you can use right now. Whether you're just starting out or already deep into your process, Building Your Family is here to guide you with expert advice, specialized education, stress reduction strategies, and a community to support you every step of the way. We can't wait to see you inside. As we were saying in the previous episode, so everybody should look at that, If you have a partner who you love and you say, this is a person I want, then you're going to probably say, okay, I'll take that person. And if I can eliminate any problems, I will. And if I can't, I'm going to roll the dice. But if you're choosing a donor, you're not committed to that person. You get to choose. So why not choose the healthiest person you can for your children? So when we do psychological screening, we screen for psychopathology, but there's also two indicators for deception, overt and covert lying. And so we get a sense if they're not telling the truth on the test, then, maybe they're not telling the truth about their medical history and things like that. Are there other things that we can get from your screening that we can understand about the donor that we wouldn't be able to get in the psychological screening?
Yeah, I mean, mainly polygenic score. So again, like if you simply use one of these, these spit kits or blood kits, the simple DNA kit that you get for 23andMe, that sort of thing. What we do, for example, at our lab at Harrisite in North Carolina, we do this special kind of short and long read sequencing. So we get a really complete picture of the genome of each parent, an adult in this case. And we can look at some of the unique risks they have, but we can also do something interesting, which is whether you have a partner already or you're screening for a partner, like a donor or an actual partner, we can do these simulations where we run your DNA and their DNA through a simulator 500 times to mimic sexual recombination and look at what your
Wow.
average embryos are likely to look like. And I mean, the reason we do it is not really for donors. We can do it for that purpose, but it's mainly like when a couple comes in, first of all, they might not know their family history, or they come from a third world country
Right.
where there just aren't good medical records or whatever. Their parents died young. It could be anything. And first of all, we're going to be able to reveal some interesting things about them to
Yes.
themselves. That's interesting because for two reasons. One, when you then do IVF, or if you've done it already, we can then produce, here's what your average embryos are going to look like in any given cycle of IVF. You're going to get it either genetically lucky or unlucky with respect to whatever traits you're interested in. Just take a random one, like my grandmother had rheumatoid arthritis, which was quite bad. And so that's the one that I'm going to look for when I do this. She had a couple of other autoimmune diseases too, but she had all these other great traits. She was beautiful and smart and all these other things. So anyway, like if we did a round of IVF and we got 4 or 5 healthy embryos, it may be that just by random sheer chance of sexual recombination, of the sperm meeting the egg, actually they're shifted a little bit high on the risk spectrum relative to what we could get. That test that we give where we sequence the parents and do these 500 simulations, it'll tell you actually if you do another round of IVF, it's likely, not guaranteed, but likely you'll score a little better. Or if
Hmm.
you already scored pretty good, it's like, well, you've already got good embryos. There's no point in doing another round of IVF, et cetera. So
Hmm.
yeah, by doing these polygenic
Interesting.
screens, we could not only match you up with donors or partners or whatever, but we can kind of potentially save you money, or maybe not save you money. You're going to spend a little more money because you got genetically unlucky the first time, but the second time you are likely to be closer to the average, let's say.
That's so interesting. And so I guess my next big question is this available to the public? And if so, what does it cost people?
Well, we're available. There's a couple of companies besides us too. So Harrisite has definitely the best polygenic scores in the world. It's not even close there in terms of disease risks and then the number of traits that we offer. But we are expensive for now anyway. So because we do the special sequencing on the parents and even potential relatives, and because we have a lot of upfront costs, very high upfront costs, we charge $50,000, but for an
Wow.
unlimited package that lasts 5 years of service and an unlimited number of embryos. So you could go the opposite and do like a per embryo price. And I know, for example, Orchid Genomics, I think they do 2,500 per embryo, et cetera. But then there are special services you have to get, et cetera. And if you have a lot of embryos, that ends up being expensive. What we do is on the other end, we have this upfront price, but it includes all of the sequencing, an unlimited number of embryos, unlimited number of testing. We also do PGTA, M, P plus neurorisk, and genetic counseling. And so even though it's a high upfront price, it includes a huge amount of service over many years and over an unlimited number of embryos. And so in that sense, it's costly, but our costs are pretty high, and we spend a lot of time, like 20 to 25 hours one-on-one with every customer. We help you find a
Wow.
clinic, we do the sequencing, and all of it is sort of included in that price. We have some discounts for, testimonials and things like that. And eventually, my view is actually we're still going to keep a high price for some people who want like really intimate service and they can make special requests and so on. And then we want to drop the price, so that it's as maximally accessible, but maybe you're not going to get as good a service. It's kind of upload your data here and it'll be a lower price. Or maybe you just have a few embryos, and so we're not going to do this continual years of service and so on. So, we're a startup. We just launched, we've been at this for 4 years, doing the research and developing the scores, but we just launched publicly about 4 months ago. We've already had about
Oh,
100 customers. I think it's 105 technically, 12 babies born, because we were operating in stealth for a couple of years, which is typical for kind of Silicon Valley companies. While we're perfecting things, we'd have a few people. But what we really want to do now is scale pretty massively around the world. So I just got back from Israel and Dubai. And, these
wow.
are countries where either, in Dubai, like the government wants to offer genetic screening for people. That's partly because cousin marriage rates have been high, historically. In Israel, there are different reasons. They already subsidize IVF to make sure that everybody who wants a kid can have a kid. And once you
Nice.
subsidize IVF, then, it's easy enough to subsidize genetic testing. And so basically what's going to happen, even in the medium to short run, is that prices are going to fall, quality is going to go up, because you're just going to have more and better scores. Our scores are already really quite good, but I expect them to only get better, and prices will fall. We'll have more differentiation where we might even raise the price of the big service that I mentioned, but then dramatically lower the price for for some of the more kind of automated service as we develop that in the coming years.
So, what about the average person who goes through IVF and they say, either my partner or maybe my donor is fine. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong. My donor had psychological screening, but of course, the family's history is self reported. And so we don't really know many generations back. My partner maybe doesn't talk to his family, or they're not around, or they're not alive. I just want to double check that there's no schizophrenia or whatever, some other issue in the family tree that I can't see. For something like that, would it be the same price or is it a different cost?
So we don't typically do individuals like that. We probably would. It's kind of a separate category because we've got a whole pipeline. We've got a lab that, sequences embryos. We've got all these specialists and in genetics and genetic counseling and that sort of thing. We do show parents, if they want to see them, their own polygenic scores along the way, and especially in the simulation. But yeah, I can imagine we would serve some people who were interested in that. It's not something we typically do, but I think we could, and yeah, it would be substantially lower than that. I will say that the so-called short and long read sequencing that I mentioned earlier, it's in much more depth than a standard whole genome sequence. So you can go to a lot of companies right now and you get your genome sequence for about 400, $500. What you're getting for that is, it's not nothing, but there are two limitations to that. One is whole genome sequencing itself can be a bit of a misleading term. You're not typically getting every single base pair. And to make sure that we get every base pair, to make sure that we get the maximum possible coverage of the genome, we have these two different varieties that we put together, and it's like 30x and 40x, and that costs money. So I think our raw costs are, I don't know, a couple $1,000 per parent. And so, yeah, we would have to recoup some profit, or at least break even on that. We'd have to charge at least a couple $1,000. But yeah,
Hmm.
those are the kind of input costs. And I think it's really worth knowing. I mean, we're moving into a world where more and more people are getting genetically tested. And maybe I could just even give some advice. I don't really care, are they going to use us or not? I mean, just as a person in the world who wants to know more about themselves and their own health risks, as mentioned, not all whole genome sequencing is equal. There's the kind of rough map, and then there's the details, and that really does matter. But similarly, definitely not all polygenic prediction is equal. And in fact, not even all monogenic prediction is equal. So one thing we do is we actually have double calling, where we have two independent scientists verifying whether or not they've seen that single gene. Because again, there are different kinds of sequencing. There are false positives and false negatives. We want to be like really, really sure. And that takes time and money and expertise and all of that. And so you might just say, oh, why doesn't everyone just drop their price to the lowest one in the market? It's like $400. It's like, well, first of all, they're not truly getting full coverage. And secondly, a lot of their predictors have false positives. And then when you get to polygenic prediction, that's where there are truly dramatic differences between companies. And I mean, really dramatic. Like there are some
Wow.
companies, I'm not going to name them. There are some companies that are offering what I will call basically horoscope predictors. They're barely better than chance. And
Wow.
this is something where I'm going to argue kind of against the own self-interest of my company. Like, I actually think there may be reasons for regulations on this. And the regulations shouldn't be, outlawing this or something. I think that's silly. But at the very least, if there are regulations or at least social norms where companies should really display how powerful their predictions are, how they've validated their results, et cetera. And there should probably be independent teams. I talked to a guy in Israel named Shai Karmi about this, who's one of the leaders in the field, and I think he agreed with this. There are other people who do too, where you have true experts, not self-appointed experts, but people who are acknowledged to be leaders in the field, and maybe they could have a commission where they independently validate the claims that companies make. They're probably in a better position to do this than a government, because governments can get captured by special interests and
Yes.
so on.
Yes, for
So
sure.
yeah, I'm not a big regulation guy. I'm pretty libertarian on this stuff. And I think, markets tend to work well. But in this case, there is a kind of harnessing my academic economist background. There's asymmetries of information in some markets where the sellers know a lot more than the buyers. And the goal of any market is to bring those to parity so that it's a
Yes.
true fair
Yes.
trade. And so anyone in this market, whether they're thinking about embryo screening or screening themselves and getting their own polygenic scores or monogenic scores, you should be asking the companies, how powerful are your predictors? How do you prove it? And how do they work across diverse ancestries? Because there are differences there. If we don't have good
Yes.
data on some ancestries, I mean, we're very transparent. Right now, our predictors do work better for Europeans than they do for Asians, but Asians are catching up. Hispanics are catching up. And the reason for that is, the biobanks traditionally were in European countries, American, et cetera. And of course, they're going to be biased in favor of the people who live in those countries.
Yes. Yes.
Sweden doesn't have a lot of, Mongolians in Sweden, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
so the Swedish
Exactly.
biobank isn't going to predict, Mongolian traits as well. But we're
Right.
actually making big strides in that. And we try to access as many biobanks around the world as possible. We just got access to Japan and the Middle East. And so really forgetting my company, because you should worry about yourself, any company that you use should be asking these questions.
I'm with you 100%. Absolutely. Patients deserve transparency.
Yep,
It's really
exactly.
important. Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much for all this wonderful information. Is there anything that we've left out that you'd like to add?
Not especially. I mean, I think this is an exciting field. It's fast moving. And so, yeah, as patients, I mean, you know, the government can do some things to help you, right? But the government is never going to run your life, as well as you can.
Right.
And so you
Yes.
unfortunately, you need to seek information. And it's difficult because some of these fields are a bit politicized. Like some people on the right and the left, they don't like IVF. And they certainly,
Mhm.
if they don't like IVF, they don't like genetic testing. And so they'll kind of
Mhm.
obscure the waters and say, oh, none of this works. Or if you do IVF, you're going to have all these birth defects. It's never been harder to get evidence on what really works and what the best evidence is. But unfortunately, you got to seek that evidence out and kind of ask for independent opinions. And if
Yes.
someone has super strong political views and they're talking about the science, take that into account. Like they might not be telling you the whole story. So, just be skeptical, but don't be cynical and just look for the best evidence, I would say.
Right. PubMed is better than Dr. Google.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yep.
yes, yes. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This is so terrific. And as your company develops more and more, we'd love to have you back and talk more about this because I'm sure there's going to be more to talk about and more interest from patients for sure. So Thank you for coming.
I'd be happy to come back. Yeah, I appreciate the time.
So where can people find you if they'd like to reach out to you and ask you questions?
I have a website that has my academic stuff on it, but maybe more interesting is the company website is harasite.com. And no, it's not parasite with a P. It's Harasite. Hera was the goddess of fertility and family. And so we
Oh,
named ourselves after the Greek goddess Hera. So yeah, harasite.com, we post all of our scientific papers there. And what we try to do is, okay, there's the hardcore science, and then we do Substack articles kind of trying to explain in more ordinary language. And then we're even doing videos now. And so as that
oh,
goes, we'll try to, for different audiences, so
great.
harasite.com, and then they can also look me up. I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes. And I wrote
We
a little
will.
book. I know they can read your book, and mine is just called Creating Future People: The Science and Ethics of Genetic Selection.
Terrific. Well, I can't wait to get it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate your time. And again, please press subscribe and take a look at the show notes. We have so much great information about our workshops, about our membership, about our donor conception masterclass, and so much to offer you. So take a look, and I will see you next week. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this was helpful to you. And if you'd like more personalized support, more information, and more education, you can find it in the show notes under the Building Your Family community. We'd love to see you inside. And if you were interested in today's topic, you will really like this video.